Liza Hemstock is a witch. She is one of the main characters in the Graveyard book, written by Neil Gaimen. Nobody Owens meets her and becomes her friend when he wanders over into the unconsecrated ground of the graveyard known as the Potter's Field. The Potter's Field is reserved for suicides, hangings, and witches. Bot asks her, "They say a witch is buried here." She nodded, "Drowned and burned." "You were drowned and burned?" "Yes, I was. They come to my little cottage at dawn, before I'm proper awake, and drags me out onto the green. 'You're a witch,' they shouts. Fat and fresh scrubbed, all pink in the morning, like so many pigwiggins scrubbed clean for market day. One by one, they gets up beneath the sky, and tells of milk gone sour, and horses gone lame, and finally, Mistress Jemima gets up, the fattest, pinkest, best scrubbed of them all, and tells how, as Solomon Porritt now cuts her dead and instead hangs around the wash-house like a wasp about a honey-pot. And it's all my magic,' she said, 'that made him so, and the poor young man must be bespelled.' So they strap me to the cucking stool and forces it under the water of the duck pond, saying if I'm a witch, I'll neither drown nor care. But if I'm not a witch, I'll feel it." I decided to find out a little bit more about witchcraft and what actually took place. Liza wasn't kidding when she said they strapped her up and tried to dunk her in the duck pond. The persecution of witches began in England in 1563, approximately 200 years after becoming widespread throughout the rest of Europe. The witch hysteria of Europe reached England during the reign of Elizabeth I, who feared witches and believed witchcraft to be an act of rebellion against God. Events such as the bubonic plague helped fuel the hysteria, and accused witches were tried and punished. Of course, we know that Liza really was a witch, and she put a curse on the whole town. After she died, a red carpet, was sent to the town, and on that carpet was the bubonic plague. Most of the town ended up dying after that. So, who was guilty? People accused of witchcraft in the 17th century were usually falsely accused Christians. Accused witches were often women, usually poor and widowed. There were many reasons for this. They were too pushy, they were shrewish, the town didn't like them, they were snaggletooth, different reasons. Another reason, and this is the reason Liza was accused, is because neighbors, often jealous of another person's beauty or another person's friendliness, shall we say, with the men, got mad and they accused them. That's exactly what happened to Liza. The most famous witch hunter was Matthew Hopkins. He was known as the Witchfinder General. It was during 1642 to 1649, that was the English Civil War, that he gave himself the title of Witchfinder General. Hopkins began by questioning an old woman with one leg known as Elizabeth Clark, and by the time he finished questioning her, he had accused another 31 women of witchcraft. During his reign, he had between 200 and 400 people executed. This was a lucrative business for him, and he earned 15 to 23 pounds per town, when most people earned as little as 2 pence per day. As with Elizabeth Clark, he specialized in getting confessions from elderly women with pets. This is where it gets interesting, and this is what may have happened to Liza. Hopkins used various methods of torture that would shed no blood to get confessions from the witches. Hopkins identified witches based on what he called devil's marks. This could be a wart or mole or even a flea bite. He then used his jabbing needle to see if these marks were insensitive to pain. His needle was a 3-inch long spike, which retracted into the spring-loaded handle, so the women never felt any pain. Another method of torture was watching. He would keep the suspect awake on surveillance for days on end, resulting in sleep deprivation, meaning that at the end, the suspect could be coaxed into confessing to almost anything. As an interesting side note, soldiers in war still use this method today. Another reason for surveillance was that Hopkins believed that witches fed their familiars with their own blood. A familiar is a pet. By keeping the witch under guard, this would also ensure that the familiars would not be able to feed from the witch, thereby depriving the witches of their alleged capabilities. However, the most famous method he employed was the swimming test. This is what happened to Liza. Hopkins would tie the suspect's limbs and thumbs together, then he would lower them into the local pond by ropes. He believed that if they sank and drowned, then they were innocent and they would go to heaven. But if they floated, then heaven had rejected them, and they would be tried as a witch, usually convicted and then hung. Either way, they lost. As we know, Liza is a witch, so she survived. When she came back up, they hung her, and then burned her, and then buried her. During his reign, Hopkins believed he was performing a public service with the witch hunts. Some celebrated Hopkins, while others reviled him. It all depended on which side you were on. Eventually, his slaughter of the innocent ended as people began to oppose of his methods. Local country people stopped believing him and thought it was Hopkins' personal financial greed that motivated his intentions. Hopkins denied these accusations, and his demise remains a mystery. One theory says that he died in his bed of tuberculosis, but the most interesting is an account by William Andrews, a 19th century writer on Essex folklore. He argues that Hopkins was accused of being a witch himself. Andrews, as well as others, claimed that the local people charged Hopkins with stealing a book containing a list of all the witches in England, which they claim he allegedly obtained through sorcery. Hopkins declared his innocence, but an angry crowd forced him to undergo his own swimming trial. Some accounts say he drowned, while others say he floated and was condemned and hanged. However, no official record of his trial or death exists. Either way, no one knows for sure what happened to Hopkins, but according to local legend, Hopkins' ghost haunts Mistley Pond, where he executed so many people who he had unjustly accused of witchcraft. Perhaps even he is buried in the potter's field right next to Liza. So that is some of the history on witchcraft and why Liza Hemstock ended up in the predicament she is in.